This report is another one in the series of information that's been prepared as part of the development of the Untitled Water Storage Scheme. Like a number of other reports, it has been updated to reflect where we're at in 2016, and in this case particularly focuses on a matter that's received quite a bit of publicity really around what was the economic benefits of the scheme. So it's great to be able to have Jeff here with his updated report and clearly to be able to answer questions for you. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew and or Jeff to go next.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. Effectively, the council asked for this report, so it's the council report. But equally, they asked for Rachel to assist with that process. That's why I'm sitting here. And I just need to give you a couple of key points in the formation of this. The first point is that when Jeff compares results from 2012 to 2016 as of around about now, that initial report was done through the feasibility phase, not the development phase. Okay? That's a key point because things have moved on quite substantially around the development phase. So I just want to make that point. The second point is the input data has been provided essentially by a combination of HBRIC and a report done by McFarlane Rural Business. But I note, and this is important, that the MRB report around land use change, profitability, etc., was a combined effort between MRB, Baker Ag, who are North Island dairy support consultants, do a lot of work in Hawke's Bay, and also by Ag First Hastings, and we've had the Ag First Hastings work reviewed by members of the industry, okay, associated in this region, associated with those numbers, because I fully expect that the increase in horticultural numbers, permanent crops, etc., which has been driving some numbers in here may be challenged, so I want to note that. Okay.
Thanks everybody for asking me to come and talk this through with you. As you know, my name's Jeff Butcher. I'm an economist from Christchurch. I've been involved in probably 10 economic impact studies of irrigation projects. And one of the things that people will always ask when we get to the other end is, what's the link between what you've said and reality as it's finally realised? All I can say is that I've been involved in 2 ex-post projects. One was of the Apua Dam and the irrigated land around that, where we compared dry land production and irrigated land production probably 5 years after the dam was completed. And the other one was down in the Waitaki River South Bank, where we looked again at an area with a lot of irrigation in it and an area with a small amount of irrigation. So the irrigated area was a big community scheme. The other was an area where there were a few people doing their own groundwater irrigation. And both of those reviews came up with figures which were broadly similar to what we expected. So I guess the point I'm making is that it's not a perfect number. The numbers I'll give you, especially around the economic impacts as opposed to the financial cost-benefit analysis, has quite big error margins, and I'll talk about some of those on the way through. There's a lot of uncertainty about land uses as a classic example, but all I can say is that the kind of impacts we've seen are the kind of impacts we were expecting and forecasting. The report that I've written talks about the financial costs and benefits, and it talks about the economic impacts, and I'll talk about the difference between those two things a wee bit later on. I've got some comparisons with the figures that we did in 2012, but I'll focus more on the current figures, although I'll touch on the reasons for the changes. So I'm going to talk briefly about the logic of irrigation, the relationship between impacts and benefits, how we build the regional economic models and estimate the flow-on effects or the multipliers, what some of the key assumptions are, and then I'll go into the results about what we think the economic impacts of irrigation will be and the financial impact, the financial benefits, which for those of you who are financially enthusiastic is net present values and benefit cost ratios. I think I talked some time ago to some people here about the various ways or those various concepts, but I just want to run over them again. And if people have questions on the way through, I'm very happy to answer them. It might help to ask them early in order to understand some of the later comments I made. I want to talk about, I guess it's reminding you of the way in which the results are calculated and how they should be interpreted. Well, the first question is...
Sorry, Madam Chair, this isn't for Mr. Butcher, but I am aware that one of our members did actually say they were recording it. Is council recording this? I think it's quite important that if we have a member recording it, there is an official record. Yeah, no. Sorry, I'll just check. Thanks. Could we make sure for official record that things are being... Thank you. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Okay, well, from farmers' point of view, there's a pretty obvious logic to irrigation. That enables a wider range of land uses, and it reduces the risk of farming with your current land uses. And those benefits are revealed in the financial models which we've used to figure out these costs and benefits. It has the potential to make any given land use considerably more profitable, and it opens a range of market and, it provides a range of market and non-market costs and benefits. So, from a wider picture, the logic of irrigation, from the farmer's perspective, you have those farm budgets, and we're looking at the difference in profitability with irrigation and without irrigation. As an economist, I'm very aware that just because somebody's made $1 doesn't mean something was in the public interest or the national interest. It's a starting point, and you have to move on from there. You always ask the question, how was it funded? Were there some subsidies somewhere? Were the costs of capital equivalent to what the costs of capital are from a national viewpoint? And what are the various non-market attributes of this project? So obviously you get social, economic impacts, and those are what I've measured, the impacts on employment and income. And you also get the environmental impacts, and I don't cover those at all, it's not my area of expertise, but they've been widely canvassed in the various hearings. So from the community's perspective, what does irrigation do? I'm talking now about just beyond the farm gate. One thing it does is provide expansion of employment opportunities. Now, especially in horticulture, there's a lot of employment on the farm, but you do get a lot of employment happening off the farm. A lot of increased value added, which is essentially it's a combination of the wages you pay people plus your returns to capital. And that's often of benefit to the people who are involved in those businesses, which get busier or get larger. A larger economy will also expand the range of activities and hence the choice available to residents. I'm not sure exactly what will happen here. The further you get away from large centres, the bigger the impacts tend to be. There are services which become available just because the population base has risen. There are services which become available because there's now a specific demand for them. You get expansion of economic activities in other industries, which I've written there, it may have benefits to them. I mean, almost invariably it does, otherwise they wouldn't bother to expand their activities. So a cost-benefit analysis, and that's what the sort of thing I've done here, assumes that the extra activity beyond the farm gate doesn't provide any financial benefits. And that comes from an assumption which economists are commonly derided for having about perfect markets. You know, if you start doing some more work in this, well, it's only barely profitable, because if it was really profitable, a whole lot more people would come in and start entering the business, and they'd drive profits back to just a normal level. I don't think that accords with reality. Economics often doesn't. The reality is that businesses benefit from having more activity, from having a greater diversity of activity, and those benefits are picked up with the economic impacts. They're not picked up with the cost So I guess the impacts and benefits, the difference between the two, there are both market and non-market benefits and attributes. To the extent that we can value various things, we include them in the financial net present value calculation or cost benefit analysis. I haven't included any non-market valuation in this project. You get some studies which say there is increased or decreased recreational opportunities, and people try and put a value on those. You can either deal with those by trying to value them, and economists do that, or you can deal with them by putting them in a big picture and saying, here's the financial numbers, and there are these social impacts, and there are these environmental impacts, and there are these recreational impacts, and you get a board of inquiry or whatever it happens to be, or the commissioners, whoever, and their job is to bring all those things together. The impacts that I'll be talking about are, I'd call them a subset of the non-market attributes. So we've got, as I said before, you've got environmental impacts and you've got some social impacts. I'm talking about the social impacts which occur with extra employment. That's what we measure, the extra employment, the extra household income, the extra value added. I think it's really important when you look at some of those numbers to recognise that an impact is not necessarily indicative of a financial benefit. And I always use myself as an example. I've come up here to talk to you guys today, and I'll be generously paid, I'm sure, by Andrew and Co. But actually, you know, I've got a whole lot of other stuff to do. Almost, you know, rather really not come, but you know, I'd like to talk to you guys. But there's always an opportunity cost, and the economic impacts measure how much is Andrew's going to pay me. But a lot of that is not a pure benefit to me. So very often the benefits are a lot less than the impacts. Remember, we've got the cost benefit analysis is over here, and then there's some economic impacts over here, which are, we think about those in addition to the financial costs and benefits. I think it's important, I tend not to focus on the value added figures, I tend to focus on the employment figures. And I focus on those because A, they're a bit easier to get our heads around, I think. You know, when I say to you that the net present value of the project is $946 million over the next 35 years at a discount rate of 7%, everybody's eyes are glazing over. When I say there'll probably be an extra 1,200 jobs created long-term in the district or the region, it means much more to people. It's also, I think, useful because we can say, what else could we do instead to create 1,200 jobs, and what would it cost us? And so we can, I think it's also a useful way to think about it. It's also useful to say, so there's some environmental impacts here, some of them will be good, some of them will be bad, and we've got to weigh those up against the financial benefits which accrue to the ones we've measured. They're to a small group, they're the farmers and the people who are supplying water, and they split those benefits between them. But we've got all these off-farm impacts which have a benefit to the wider community. I think that the benefits, if you think about employment, they're most obvious where you've got unemployment. If you've got somebody who's employed and all they do is shift their jobs, well, yeah, they're a bit better off, otherwise they wouldn't have shifted, but the benefits aren't huge. But if you've got unemployment, and in New Zealand we do have quite significant unemployment, or if you've got a community that's declining or is growing more slowly than it wants to, then you get some obvious benefits. I'll just touch for a second on the unemployment. We've got, officially, I think it's about 5% unemployment. We've probably got as many people again who are unemployed but don't qualify, because if you've worked 1 hour in the 2 weeks of the reference period, you're employed. And then we've got another bunch of people again who want more work. So you can take the officially unemployed and multiply it by between 2 and 2.5 to figure out how many people you've really got unemployed. And I haven't looked at the figures for Hawke's Bay, but if you're like the rest of New Zealand, it's quite a lot of people.
I'm really interested, because I'm doing a lot of work myself, and is that the economic growth and unemployment, they're not linked. There's a gap.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
What's your view on that?
Well, I think that often people say we've got economic growth and we've still got unemployment. Therefore, the economic growth isn't giving us employment. But the question needs to be, if we hadn't had the economic growth, what would have happened to the employment? So you need to look with and without rather than before and after, because there's a lot of areas where we're continually shedding labour as we more intensively capitalise industry. So if you hadn't had that economic growth, you might have had less employment. You with me? So the economic growth's giving you employment, but it's not reducing unemployment, but it's reducing it below what it otherwise would have been.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And this is more esoteric really, but I'm quite interested. We have a raft of people who, no matter if we have economic growth, a group of people that do not get a job anyway. And there's a gap between how we get those people employed, or how we make them part of the economic growth.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and there are a whole lot of social and economic policies that you need to put in place to address those. This is one of those things which is the growth, which won't necessarily help employ those people, although it will provide jobs more than would otherwise be.
Right, job.
Yeah, but does it necessarily go to the right people? And that's further than I try and go. You need to get Nick Taylor, a social impact specialist, to try and talk to you about that. So an economic impact analysis isn't a commercial analysis. It's something that sits beside the commercial analysis. It's probably a reasonable summary of that. It adds some information to your cost-benefit analysis. How did we do all this work? Well, we started off with creating a regional model which really shows the links between industries. If one industry grows, others have to provide inputs to that. And a simple example is the freezing works grows, so it needs more plastic bags, so somebody has to make the plastic bags, and that requires more labour, and it requires more electricity, and it requires more imports to come through the port, and the extra imports through the port require some other things. So by understanding the relationships between the industries, you can work out the total flow-on effects. A guy called Wassily Leontief won a Nobel Prize for figuring it out. Matrix algebra, which is a wee bit above my head, but I understand in principle how it works. A basic model which I create starts off assuming that industries in Hawke's Bay are the same average structure as the rest of New Zealand. Now we know that's not true. So we then get some figures on actual farming in Hawke's Bay from, in this case, McFarlane Rural Business and the people that help them to do that. And so we put those into the model so we can figure out what the actual flow-on effects are of that kind of farming in the Hawke's Bay. One of the issues always is, well, where do farmers get their inputs from? And if they buy them from within the Hawke's Bay, then obviously you've got an economic impact. If they buy them outside, you don't. So we surveyed farmers, and that survey is now probably 4 or 5 years old, and said, where do you buy your inputs from? Where does your family spend its money? So we try and get a reasonably accurate picture of where the spending takes place so that we can estimate these flow-on effects. One of the limitations of input-output models, which is what I'm using, it assumes that if you want to expand, you'll be able to get more labour. And I've been criticised for the unreality of that, and particularly on the West Coast with regard to the mining at Denniston. Somebody said, Mr. Butcher, all those people would otherwise be employed doing different jobs on the West Coast. Well, the mines have closed, and the West Coast is a disaster area at the moment because people don't get other jobs and they leave. So what economic impacts do we typically calculate? We usually calculate employment, earned household income, and value added. Now, value added, for those of you who are accountants, it's the returns to labour and capital. So it's a combination of the wages, that's part of value added, and the returns to capital, which you can think of as EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax and depreciation. The interest is part of the value added, it's just went to the bank instead, or to whoever owned that capital. The depreciation is regarded as part of the value added, although one could argue about that. In the work that we've done, there are some really key assumptions. One is the land use mix. The economic impacts and the cost-benefit analysis is highly dependent on the land use mix and on the farm budgets. I don't decide what the land use mix is or ought to be. In this case, I understand that it was BNZ and something. Do you want to talk briefly about that?
Yeah, briefly. So McFarlane plus the other parties, Bain Rag first, and their review looked at land use and land use mix and proportions. And in addition to that, as if you recall, in September of last year, HBRIC reported to the council its uptake curves, which are a forecasting methodology. Those uptake curves have been applied by both the base case uptake curve as well as the downside uptake curve. This is what you come assessment over that, which is a banking methodology, and in turn then forecast out based on rational behaviour what land uses may do. So that's the sort of input data that Jeff has taken.
So I know nothing about that, Rob. I just take the figures they give me and say, you've employed your experts in that area, I'll take their figures, I'll model the off-farm impacts, I'll do the cost benefit analysis.
Let's pause on that. You take someone else's advice on land use assumptions. So if somebody comes to you and said, we can put 3,000 hectares into apples, hypothetically, you go accept that advice.
I do. I usually ask questions and say things like, why have you changed this since the last time you talked to me? But I'm not an expert on land together. I run a small holding, which runs that is about 50 hectares, but I'm not an expert in these areas. So I don't try and pretend I am, and people like Andy McFarlane, they come and defend those kind of issues. I don't understand farm budgets, but I say things like, in one of the earlier cases of this, where's your irrigation cost? Oh, sorry. So I went through their budgets in detail to make sure that from my perspective and my understanding, they were sensible, but I'm not an expert, so I rely on what they're telling me. And as you well know, garbage in, garbage out, quality in, quality out. I'm assuming that they're reasonably informed people and the quality is reasonable.
Why do you assume that? Why do you assume that?
I don't have an alternative. That's why we do sensitivity testing. We'll look at different uptake rates.
Yeah, so to reinforce that, that's precisely why we did sensitivity analysis on, for example, horticultural land area. That's exactly why it's in that report. And it's precisely why we tested those budget numbers with industry members, including, in one particular case, parties hybridised to take a large volume of water for that purpose.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, so I'm not sure whether this is the right time to raise this matter, but I've got grave doubts about the rubbish problem. Because I'm pretty closely connected with the pippery industry, and I can't find anybody that's got any plan to plant down there. And the report says we're going to go from 700 hectares to 2,000. The report's wrong on both those numbers because the current plantings, and I've checked this with pippery in New Zealand, the current registered plantings are not 700, they're 400, less than 450. So I don't know where the 700 even came from. But I can't find anybody that's planning to plant any orchards there in the next 10 years.
So I'll answer that. You are mixing up a couple of numbers there, Councillor Bevan. If you went back to the 2012 feasibility report, it assumed 700 hectares of viticulture and horticultural, permanent horticultural crops. That's what it assumed. Didn't assume what was there currently. It assumed that was the consequence of the return scheme at that point in time. And might I add, in the process that McFarlane Rural Business and the other parties undertook, at that time in 2012, their view was that, interestingly, they got an answer from the consultants at the time that was actually pretty gloomy around the forecast for horticulture. Interesting enough, and quite bullish around dairy. So I'm going to elaborate and make a point there. This is at least a 70-year project, and you can expect that the land uses through that 70-year period will cycle and change through that 70-year period. So this is a point in time. It would be, for example, not unrealistic, in my view, to expect permanent horticulture, which may or may not be viticulture and horticulture, but something entirely different in that 70-year period. And if you want to examine that, suggest you go to Tasmania and have a look, because that's exactly what's going on in Tasmania. You'd be interested in the permanent horticulture crops and horticultural crops existing under irrigation. So I think that's the point. Jeff's not trying to say these are absolute numbers, but what he is saying is that there's a sensible set of assumptions that need to be peer-reviewed and tested.
I've got no argument with that. Over 70 years, of course, there are going to be changes in land use, but what we're looking at here is determining the supposed extra employment that's going to happen. So on that basis, is this looking at extra employment over a 70-year period or in the next 5 or 10 or what?
It gives you the employment impacts which are likely to occur when you've got full development of the hectares that have been preserved. And if we assumed the same increase in hectares, we'd get roughly the same impacts in terms of employment. There's always a real problem that you're trying to take long-term perspectives of sort of 70 years, and it's possible that the pip fruit won't occur. I always think of pip fruit as being, well, it's a placeholder. We did one in Huranui, where in that case we used black currants because there were quite a lot of black currants, and rather than try and forecast budgets for 35 different land uses and sort of, try and guess what the hectares of each would be, we use particular ones. But I think the point you're making, and I think it's absolutely valid, and I'll refer to it later, is that a huge amount of the increases in employment and in household income occur because of the assumptions about the growth in viticulture and apples, horticulture. If the growth occurred in some other type of similar land use intensity, we'd get the same sort of impact. So it doesn't have to be apples, but apples are used as something that's reasonably representative of that. But if those don't occur,
Why don't you just use hemp and get on with it?
well, if you gave my budget with some sense in doing that.
Chair, and we have other questions waiting, so Councillor Scott.
Thank you. I've just got a question around, because I'm quite surprised to hear that there's no intention for any increase of horticulture in the area. From memory, Madam Chair, and maybe the CEO could clarify, or perhaps Mr. Newman could, when the extra tranche of groundwater was made available, albeit on very limited grounds because of the mitigation of surface water flows, I thought we had more than one application received for that. And my understanding wasn't that from the horticultural sector?
Yes, it was, and actually it was from the pip fruit sector.
So obviously there must be some interest down there in increasing.
From memory, I think it's about 1.5 million cubic metres of water.
Thank you.
Chief,
Madam
I'm
Chairman,
going to-
question.
No, I have other questions. Chief, do you want to carry on with the presentation and take questions lead, or do you still want to take questions now? Because I've got 3 hands up.
I think let's press ahead and not argue again at the moment about the land use assumptions, because I can't really help you there. All I can say is that these are placeholders soon to be representative of some land uses. If those don't happen, then you will get appropriately less economic impacts. And I've done some sensitivity testing to show what would happen if we went back to the original assumptions, but then you could do infinite levels of sensitivity testing on all sorts of other areas. And again, you could ask me all about the budgets and say, these are unrealistic. I was involved in the Central Plains hearing where I took to task the guys who were using $8.30 for the price of milk, and I said, you need to be looking at long-term averages, about $6.30, I think, a kilo is what they've used now. And in fact, it was Andy McFarlane I took to task. So when they did these ones, which is, Central Plains was 5 years ago, they used what I would regard as a reasonable long-term average. At the moment, it's looking highly optimistic. The budgets here are based on $6 a kilo, and so many farmers just wish that was happening around the corner. But the industries are highly volatile and highly cyclical, and we try and use long-term averages. That's the best we can do. And I'm not the expert, so I don't think we should ask me any more questions about that, but by all means, have the debates with everybody else later on. But as you pointed out, the assumptions drive the results.
Okay, so points of clarification still through the chair, but we will have time for discussions at the end. And I know.
Sorry, are you taking questions?
No, you just heard him, so carry on.
Okay, well, that just shows you the assumptions about the land use. So if you look at the bottom right, you've got an assumption about this is a percentage of irrigated hectares, 8% orchards, 8% grapes. And as I said, orchards represent various forms of horticulture, grapes represent different forms of horticulture. You'll note that the figure there of 43,000 hectares, that's because a lot of the sheep and beef, it's not irrigated, but it benefits from irrigation because you're able to farm the land in a different way in conjunction with some irrigated land that we have. So those are the numbers. I know they're highly contentious and they have a significant impact on the results. Well, what are the results? Well, I've focused on a 70-year project lifetime and a 5% discount rate. Both the lifetime and the discount rate are contentious. I don't know if you're all familiar with the concept of the discount rate that says having something in the future is worth less than having it now. Forgetting about inflation, assuming zero inflation. It's better to have something now than later. Apart from anything else, if you had it now, you could invest it somewhere else. Some people wanted to use a higher discount rate, and in particular, I'm sure some of you will be familiar with Mr. Fraser at public meetings said, I want to use 35. Well, he said, if we use 35 years at 8%, we get a different answer. And I'll talk about the sensitivity, and I'll show you the figures for that. You get buried in figures in this stuff. I think 5% represents a realistic, what's sometimes called a social rate of time preference. We care about the future. It matters. If you discounted 8%, everything after 30 years, in fact after 25 years, really doesn't count. And I don't think that's the way the community thinks. It's certainly not the way farmers think. And if you look at a lot of the investments that farmers make, people have estimated the rates of return on investment in agriculture is 3 or 4%. Of course, sometimes you get booming land prices and sometimes you get slumping ones. Why 70 years and why 35 years? Mr. Fraser said 35 years because that's the period for which you've got a resource consent. And I said, true, and we had a conversation afterwards, an email. And I said, but if you thought it wasn't going, are you telling me there's zero probability of it going past 35 years? And I look at all the other irrigation schemes which haven't been demolished after 35 or 50 or 100 years. And I just think it's extremely unlikely. I did a wee bit of analysis where I said, let's assume that the probability of it still existing after 35 years is it's 100%, and then it slowly tails off to 0% after 100 years. What does it do to the net present values? And that's in the report. It reduces them, of course, but it doesn't in any sense make them negative. So I tend to focus on that because I think that as an independent economist, I really don't care if the scheme comes or goes, it's not my worry. But from an economics point of view, I think that's appropriate. I'm involved in another project about flooding in Canterbury. We had some expert across from the UK. They said commonly in the EC, they're using 4%. British government uses 3.5 or 4%. We seem to have high capital. For many years, the Treasury required us to use 10% in public sector valuations. Then it went to 8%. Now it's come to 7%. Transit New Zealand roading programs is using 6%. Maybe it's partly because real costs of capital are coming down. I just think that's a realistic number. The dam and the distribution costs have risen from 217 to 294 million. That's a net present value figure. It also includes, one of the reasons it's risen, as Andrew referred to earlier, is that when we did the first figures in 2012, this was at a feasibility stage and you hadn't got the final design exactly where the water was going to go. Were you going to pump it and pressurise the lines? There's a whole lot of things that have changed since then. And the other thing that changed a lot was the, better turn over to where I've scribbled notes. The mitigation costs. I made an error when I did the original analysis because I was told here are the mitigation costs for years 5 to 30 or whatever it was. I understood them to be a total over the 30 years. In fact, they were supposed to be a per year cost. But the real figure, the real reason for that mitigation change, and it's a significant number now, is that as the scheme was developed, more and more mitigation was put in place, and of course mitigation is always expensive. So that makes the project look less attractive than it used to. But it's got a quicker build, 4 years instead of 3 years. That means you start getting the benefits of the water sooner, so that's a plus. The irrigated area has been increased from 25 to 26 to 50 hectares. That's 25,000 to 26 to 50 hectares. And my understanding is that that reflects better analysis of how much various land uses are likely to take. So I don't think it's the biggest scheme. I think it's a better use of the water. But you know, be that as it may, that's the change in assumptions. The uptake assumptions have changed. Originally it was 56% in the by year 1, you've got 56% of people to commit. And by year 100, it was, well, I've got 8, but it was, I think it was 100% in year.
100%.
Ah, yes, and 100% in year 8. It's now 64% in year 1 and 94% in year 8. So the assumption has been made, and again, this isn't my area, that you will have a farm, and in fact, possibly you won't start the scheme until you get it. So the proof of that particular point will be in the eating, which is, I know, part of what will drive whether the scheme gets a go or not go. Farm investments increased from 356 to 556, and my wife sent me, oh, you might be interested in this, Radio New Zealand, I think it was, have got some numbers on this and said, the headline says dam costs increased from 400 million to $1 billion, or whatever they said. Now, the reason that the huge increases occurred on the costs of on-farm investment is because you've got that increase in horticulture, orchards and viticulture, expensive things to develop. And there's a table in the report which just shows there was a bit of an increase, I think it was in dairying, because it's assumed they've got to do some more intensive treatment of their water. And there are some other changes, but really the change is coming on farm because of the increase in area. Farm profits per year at full development have gone up from $46 to $85 million a year. And again, it's driven by considerably higher profits per hectare for the orchards and the grapes, and you can all argue with the experts, not me, not my area. They have assured me that these are realistic figures, and Andrew Newman has said, we've gone and talked to the industry. I said, are we talking realistic long-term averages? And they said, we think so. You have greater profitability of different crop types than you used to have. Everybody was feeling depressed when they did these 5 years ago, but logically, feeling depressed shouldn't alter your view about the long-term average. The reality is it does. If people were doing a long-term average now for dairying, there will be people out there saying, $6.30 a long-term average of dairying, you're dreaming. Well, maybe. So that's what's driven the higher profits on farm, and again, there's a table in the report to show exactly which industries it's been driven by. But it's horticulture, pit fruit and viticulture, which are, as I said, the placeholders for horticulture generally. There's assumed to be some sales of potable water to one of the councils, and that has a net present value of $6 million. There's some environmental benefits now. They are, my understanding is that there's none of these last line have happened, right, and been negotiated. The assumption is that the regional council is going to say, we think there would be a benefit in taking extra water for environmental purposes, and I've assessed that benefit, assuming that the council is a rational body. I've assumed that the benefits are equivalent to what you could have sold the water to somebody else for on the irrigation market.
Bold assumption.
It is a bold assumption. Maybe worth much more than that, maybe worth much less than that.
A little about the rational decision-making process.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And then there's quite a lot of water left over. The spot water is, we've got a net present value there of 32 million. Some of you will say, what's spot water? Well, you don't commit to providing people with water unless you can give it to them reliably. But there will be lots of years when you have spare water, which you can sell to people who want it but didn't want to have a long-term investment. Again, you could argue what that water will be worth. It's assumed to be worth 27 cents a cubic metre. It has and the reason I put those numbers in there specifically is you can say, I don't believe a word of that. You get half that if you're lucky. Okay. From the net present value figures we've got, these are all 70 years, 5% discount rate. From the net present value figures, take off half of the 32 million. I won't focus on that one. I'll focus on the 70-year one. The revised estimates there and the original estimates there. So you can see we've got higher scheme capital costs, which is a negative for the project. We've got higher farm capital costs, which obviously is a negative for the project. We're not going to be selling electricity. That's been removed from the project, so that's a negative compared to where we were in 2012. Scheme operating costs have been increased, partly I think because there's more pumping is going to happen, so more electricity. Water charges paid by farmers and the profits to farmers after water charges have increased enormously. And the water charges paid by farmers, it changes obviously the profitability of the scheme from a farmer's perspective. It's less profitable. And it increases the profitability of the scheme from the water provider's perspective. It's more profitable. But whatever, if you look at the round, at the farmers plus the providers of water, what you charge the farmers for water splits profit between the two groups. It doesn't actually change the level of the profit. Obviously, if it gets too high, the farmers say, we're not in, we're not buying water. If it gets too low, the people who are going to develop the project says, we're out, we can't make $1. And we've got those other water charges that I referred to there. Okay, so there's been a huge increase in the net present value of the project at 5% over 70 years. And that gives you the breakdown. And to come back to the point that people made earlier, if you don't get the increase, if you don't get the uptake being a bit faster, if you don't get the higher profitability, then obviously those figures will not increase as much.
Clarification, Madam Chair. And again, sorry, to go back to that. If the other water charges don't manifest themselves, you take 55 off the cumulative net present value.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, as you point out, put it in context, it's significant, but it's not going to change your answer. One of the points to note is that a lot more is being paid by farmers for water. One of the reasons is that there's a bit of a bigger area. Another reason is that they're going to start sooner. Not only will they start after 3 years instead of 4, more people will start, remember the higher uptake rates. So obviously the net present value that you pay, that farmers pay for water increases. And they're paying 35% more. The current budgets for the farms assume 27 cents a cubic metre for water, whereas originally they assumed 20 cents a cubic metre. And as I say here, the amount paid doesn't affect how good the project as a whole is, but it does affect who gets the benefits. So the benefit cost ratios of the project, now again I'm focusing on this one here. This is the 5% discount rate, 7-year lifetime. The benefits compared to the costs are 1.8 times. If you thought you should have a high discount rate and only 35 years, they're still positive. But as somebody will hasten to tell me, that's because of the farm budgets and that had been assumed and the land uses that had been assumed, obviously. Well, yes, it's all about that, but it's all about what discount rate's appropriate. It's all about what lifetime of the project is appropriate.
On the base information.
Yes, on the base information, yeah. And when you will really understand whether that base information is reliable in terms of the cost-benefit analysis is when people say, we'll buy the water at that price. The uptake is your evidence that whatever land use we assume, these people said, we're going to be better off, we're going to buy the water. And in the case of Apua, which was really interesting, that was significantly funded by private investors who didn't want water. They sold it within 5 years for between 2 and 4 times, I think it was, the price that they paid. But of course, Apua was a cheap scheme. You might not be able to sell this for 2 or 4 times the price you paid. So I've focused so far on the financials. And as I said before, the social impacts are another part of the story that you need to think about. The wider range of goods and services to the community, the increased household income, and the environmental impacts, which are not part of this analysis. So when you're building this thing, there'll be a lot of people employed. There's a lot of money gets spent. I won't dwell on this. This is something that, and you note that that's called job years, as opposed to long-term jobs in the farming part of it. This will occur 5,400 job years, including not only construction, but all the stuff that's built for the farms, all the flow-on effects in different industries, and I've put that into the actual construction jobs that we've assumed, estimated here, are about 10% of the current construction employment in Hawke's Bay, if you average it over 3 years. So using that yardstick, it's not unreasonable. But it's the long term.
Sorry, just a point of clarification on that previous slide. Over how many years is that?
Well, the construction of the dam occurs over 3 years, but the on-farm capital expenditure, given that the full uptake doesn't place for 12, it's spread over 12 years, you spend your money sort of a year before you need to start taking water. So the on-farm part of it, which is more than the off-farm part, I think it was 294 off-farm and 556 on-farm. It's spread over quite a long time.
Just a follow-up. Go to your next slide. So if I'm understanding though, in your report, you have a uptake scenario that it's actually more like 14, 15 years until it's at the 100% rate?
Yep.
So is your model saying that the full ongoing employment impact isn't arrived at until you're at that point, 15 years out?
That's correct. All these numbers here, you'll get to that full level when you've got 100% uptake, which is after 12 or 14 years, I can't remember the exact number. You'll get 64% of them will be occurring almost as soon as you start to irrigate. Some of these effects have a bit of a lag effect. You don't start processing until the animal's been grown, so some of them are lagged effects. But once you're in what I would call a steady state of full development, those are the numbers you've got. Now, the thing that really drives the employment is vineyards and orchards. And if you look, all this pastoral and arable farming, you're getting very few extra jobs, and part of the reason is that some of that is going into the 8% is going into pit food and horticulture. But part of it is that they're just not very intensive employers people, whereas horticulture, viticulture is very intensive employment generating. I'll talk later about what sort of employment. That's what happens off-farm to support all that activity. Then you get this area down here, which has got a total of another 1,340 jobs in processing and support. And that's highly uncertain. I mean, I'd say these numbers here, subject to the land use being correct or not, these numbers here are probably good to within 30%. They might be higher than that, they might be lower than that, but that's the right sort of number. This number here has huge uncertainty. Where's it going to be processed? And how's it going to be processed? So there's some assumptions there that basically the orchard figures, those figures there include the packaging. The vineyard figures you can see down there, there's a lot of processing of grapes, and it's assumed to occur in the area, and vegetables and juiced apples are assumed to be in the area. Now, those of you who've been around for a while will remember, vegetable processing plants come and go. Where it will happen, on average, over the next 70 years, I really don't know. That's an assumption as to where it will occur.
So clarification on that. So would it be fair to assume that the 940, the farm support effects, are also being driven largely by the assumed vineyard orchard jobs? It would have to be, right?
But not quite. I mean, the proportions will be a bit different because you get quite a bit more effects off-farm and dairy and pastoral compared to on-farm. The ratios are a bit different. But even if the ratios were, twice as big, yes, obviously the majority of these effects are going to occur as a result of these here.
Thank you.
Might be worth, Jeff, in your ex-post analysis of pivot, did you pick up processing capacity?
We did. We said to farmers, where do you get your meat processed? And the days when you sent it down the road to the local freezing works are long gone. It goes all over the country. So meat processing here, and in fact the meat processing effects here are negative because there's a decline. We assume 50% of the meat processing loss would be a loss to this region. In the case of Opua and in the case of South Bank Waitaki, we didn't have significant processing of fruit and vegetables. They just weren't large horticultural areas. It was dairying and various forms of more intensive pastoral farming.
Just clarification in the form of meat processing loss. You mean as capacity throughout the country in the next 10 years refines itself? Is that what you're talking about?
No, we were talking about the fact that as you take land out of sheep into dairy and into arable and into horticulture, there's less meat being produced on the dry land. So all these things are differences with irrigation compared to without. Without irrigation, we've got quite a lot of meat processing done. Shifting into irrigation, change of land uses, that stops. So we get on to the uncertainty, which some of you alluded to before. There's lots of it. The budgets for individual farms, people will criticise those, object to them, and all I can say is, it's not my area, people are expert in the area, tried to give the most realistic budgets they could. The evidence will be, do people want to take up that land? Where will the inputs be purchased? I think there's less uncertainty about that. We've talked to people about where they buy their inputs, we've got a realistic view on it. Although you could say, yes, but they're not currently doing much irrigated farming, so where irrigated farming inputs will come from is not really certain. Obviously the land use mix is critical. As I said, the lower auctions viticulture will reduce the net present value. So in the report there's some sensitivity testing. If we go back to what used to be assumed about viticulture and horticulture, the increases that were assumed in 2012, the net present value would reduce to 522, but the benefit cost ratio would still be 1.7. Those of you who, there will be those of you who think that the original figures were far too high as well. So, you know, we could do endless iterations of what if on the land uses. Where will the output be processed? As I said before, 37% of those total employment impacts are related to processing. And this huge uncertainty. I've been an economist for 40 years and people have constantly said, we need to add more value. And every now and again there's a Royal Commission and something else and we all promise that we'll add more value. And it just doesn't happen as fast as we're all expecting it to. And that's because other people seem to be more efficient at adding value than we are. And it's only worthwhile adding value if you can do it efficiently. Grapes is a good example of where we seem to add value quite efficiently. We make some very high quality wines which get really good money. Apples is, I don't know how you would add more value. I mean, we juice sort of rubbish apples. Well, rubbish is not a fair word, but so yeah, you could get things which would have far more intensive processing, but I haven't assumed those. The processing, the data on processing from a modelling perspective is very poor anyway. These are really reasoned but rough estimates. One of the big issues is, well, is there actually needs to be capacity in the property? You know, it's all very well to say you're going to create all these extra jobs. Oh, who's going to take them up? How many people are employed currently? Unemployed currently. Certainly when you get to a regional level, you have people move in and out of the region. You don't have to have locally unemployed people to do those jobs. And people moving into the region, of course, causes problems for house prices if you don't own a house and you want to buy one. It's quite good if you already own two. But we certainly observe increases in population in those areas which have irrigation. There are some other public benefits and costs. As I report in the paper, you're going to get quite a lot of extra throughput through the port, based on a whole bunch of assumptions, and they were logical, they made sense to me. I thought through them, I talked to people in the port, you're talking maybe an extra $2.5 million a year in earnings before income tax. Eventually, my understanding is that the community in year 70 will own this asset. At that stage, that amount of money that got paid by farmers per year will be being paid to the community, which would be quite handy in terms of reducing your rates. It will become a very widespread benefit. I referred I think in the text to the fact that your challenge will be to make sure that when times are tough in farming, farmers don't get a reduced water price because times are tough and you don't get it back again later. Andrew assures me that won't happen because some of the farmers will own some of the shares and of course they won't want that to happen. But it is something that as a community, I think you have to be vigilant about.
We have a point of clarification.
I'm sorry, if you go back a slide, I thought there might be more uncertainty bullets on the next slide. One of the uncertainties you cited earlier but didn't include in this list was the uptake one, which you're also saying you're not really capable of assessing. But you did run a sensitivity chart in your last 6 of your report. And I have a question about that, just for clarification. I mean, it looks to me like what you're calling the slower uptake, actually, all the numbers are higher than the numbers in the base case.
Well, I'll probably put them the wrong way around.
So, but in any event, assuming that it's just a labeling issue, there's really rather marginal differences between what you've presented here as a base case and what you present as a slower uptake case.
Yep.
Wouldn't it be instructive to us to see a more cautious uptake, or are you unable to do that because
No, I'm able to do that.
You're able to do it if somebody tells you what it ought to be.
You give me a different uptake rate, and I can run it.
So nobody asked you to run a substantially more cautious uptake rate?
No. And I guess, just in terms of the cost-benefit analysis, the project, my understanding is, it won't proceed unless there is a sufficient uptake rate. And that uptake rate has to be contracted now before you give the go-ahead for the project, which is 3 years before the project is finished. And I would expect, let's assume it has to be 50% before you press the go button. I'll be very surprised if you don't get to 60% within another 3 years. Everything might go wrong. The 50% might be desperately trying to sell off the numbers, but I could easily do.
But just in case you're laboring under that misunderstanding, that is not the rate that we have been told would kick off this project. We've been told 45.
Right, points of clarification are going to be on the slides. There will be time for further questions at the end. Whoever's got the cell phone whistling at the back, please turn it off or leave the room.
So I was talking about the other public benefits and costs. There are obviously environmental issues around this, and as I said, it's not my area of expertise. I know that hotly debated. Canterbury is very angry. Half of Canterbury, 3/4 of Canterbury is very angry about what they perceive the problems to be as a result of. And I know that's hotly debated up here. It's not my area. I don't comment on it. I don't try and include it in the cost-benefit analysis. As I said, the cost-benefit analysis takes some financial stuff, which we know about, gives you some information about some economic impacts which are relevant to broadening that picture, how many extra jobs we have, puts into it the environmental impacts, good or bad, and that's your overall picture. The final point I was going to make was, well, there are lots of jobs, but what sort and who will take them on? And one of the problems with the horticultural jobs, I see it as a problem, a potential problem, it needs to be well managed, is that they're not particularly well paid, and they're seasonal. That said, I know that in some areas, a whole range of seasonal work kicking in at different times is what makes up full-time jobs for some people. Years ago in Central Plains, Councillor Harrow, who just happens to run a large strawberry farm, said, why haven't I assumed 25% horticulture because of all the jobs that we create? And I said, well, Councillor Harrow, do you really think that we want to create a whole swag of strawberry picking jobs? Which I just didn't see it as being, where the community was trying to go. So that's the end of what I had to say. I said, oh, I thought you'd like to see an alternative irrigation system.
It's like cost, is the category.
We can afford that one.
That'll reduce at least a couple $100 million off the category with that.
So I'm happy to answer any questions that people have, but given that there's not much point in asking me again about land use and farm budgets, because I can't tell you anything about that.
Okay, I have a number of hands up. Councillor Farnhill was first.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and a good presentation. I do want to ask you about farm budgets and things like that. Not that I want you to answer for the veracity of them, but I want you to make this observation. It's about the quality of the information and the interest of the parties. I mean, I am a little concerned that the people supplying you with the information have a vested interest in the outcome.
Yep.
And quite often with these sorts of projects, you get groups who have put up a counterfactual case, an alternative case, etc., and you get a range of propositions. But see, what we have here is your, now it's not unreasonably, you have built your castle on the basement that's been provided to you. And these are the things, but what we don't have is an alternative view. And if that was, if it was a good idea, where would we go to get an alternative view?
Well, I really can't tell you where you would go. I mean, the work that I've done in other places where we've used math monitoring farm budgets to try and provide the basis for these things. You get people like McFarlane and Associates who've got a huge database of how farms on irrigated farms perform. And the other point I make is that at that a couple of public meetings which I've been at, people have said, oh, you know, you're using rubbish. I said, look, you give me an alternative farm budget, and I have had to look at the, you know, the cost-benefit analysis and the economic impacts of an alternative farm budget, but I didn't get given one. I don't really want to make that offer again because it's so much work. But your question as to, yes, the people who ask me to do some work have a vested interest. I don't have a vested interest. My only vested interest is in not being labelled an idiot by people who think that I've clearly been led down the garden path. And I'm assuming that Andy McFarlane and the guys who did all that work for him, they've got the same professional problem, that you can't be stupid, except I also recognise what you're saying, Councillor Barker, that people have different views and they're wildly different. Obviously nobody thinks the farming operation will be unprofitable, or it wouldn't happen.
That's right.
And if the water uptake is there, that implies that farmers believe that the project will provide them, given that they have to pay enough for the water to cover it, will provide them with a margin over and above what they're doing now, given the investment, sufficient to cover the investment they've got to make and sufficient to cover the risks. But within that proviso, I couldn't tell you where else to go. I think that guys like Andy McFarlane do their best to give you a realistic view of likely farm budgets. And as Andrew said, they have run that past people in the industry. That's presumably to try and give them some comfort that they're not leading anybody else down in an appropriate way.
But just to refine my question, I'm not speculating about the farm budgets. Those are easily checked. I'm not speculating about the profitability of the farming, all those things. It's a given. What worries me about this is the underlying assumption of X% of dairy, you know, Y% of horticulture, Z% of viticulture, and the uptake rates. Now, it seems to me that these are these are figures which are best projections in terms of, you know, most optimistic. What happens if we don't move to 35% of dairy in the over period of time? What happens if the assumption that Peter's put forward, Councillor Bevan, that he doesn't know anybody who's going to go down there and put apple trees in, turns out to be correct? Apple trees go in. Nobody puts vines in. We're up to that. That's the worst case scenario. I haven't seen that.
Well, I'm not quite sure how you'd have a worst case scenario. You would have to take the land uses that were the least profitable under the assumptions that we have and assume that all land went into the least profitable of the land uses, but they would still be profitable. So you'd still get, from a cost benefit perspective, you'd still have a project which was beneficial provided you got enough uptake. And the only, I guess, if I was sitting in, you know, in your joint shoes, I'd be sitting there and saying, well, we have said that we're not going to go ahead until we've got 45% committed uptake 3 years before the project comes online. If I was, and if some of the, maybe you want to have some more sensitivity testing done on the timing of the uptake, especially from your perspective as effectively investors in the water project, that's in a whole area of financial modelling which depends on the levels of debt and equity and the required rates of return, etc. But that is what you could do. But I still say that the land use doesn't, changes in the land use mix will not lead you to a negative project return per hectare. There'll always be positive that people won't take up the water. It is a lack of people taking up the water that would be your biggest worry in terms of, is this project a goer?
Councillor Wilson.
this is not your first attempt at this stuff, and you say 10 projects you've had a look at. How, at any time have you been a mile away? At any time is this just, you know, crikey, that's all been wrong, etc. I mean, because the land is the land, irrigation takes one of the variables out of farming, makes it more certain. Are you reasonably comfortable with what you've given us here?
Your question, have I ever been a mile away? I can't answer because people are always happy to pay me for ex-ante studies, but never ex-post. So, what do you think's going to happen? So the only two we've done, and I have suggested seriously to Treasury, you know, fund some more of these projects. I don't care who does them, fund some more, and they don't. But the only two we have done had returns that were much better than we were expecting in terms of profitability, and much as we were expecting in terms of the employment creation. But I hasten to add that neither of those two projects had a whole lot of horticulture.
There was, Jeff, that was Opura North Table.
Yeah, the ex-post ones were Opura and South End Waitaki.
So just to follow up on Chairman Wilson's question, it's you would only be wildly off if the underlying assumptions were wildly off, whether that's uptake or whether it's land use. Well, no one would doubt, I don't think, that your application of the methodology you use to the inputs you've been given is accurate. You assume that you know what you're doing in that regard, and if you start with certain inputs to your model, you're going to get a result that is accurately delivered in terms of jobs created or net income or whatever. But so it does ultimately get us back around to the garbage in, garbage out issue. I guess I have 3 questions though about some things that are in here. I want to make sure that I followed the costings properly. You are saying that the all-in costs of this project are $333 million to build the dam and the pipes, $16 million of development costs, and $556 million of on-farm investment, which on my calculator adds up to $905 million. Is that correct?
I'll take the three. I mean, if I put the numbers on the table, yes, that's what I understand it to be.
All right, just so that we don't get accused of misrepresenting the economic cost overall of this project. Second, there's a comment in here that, let me find it, it's on page 39 of our version of this. I'm not sure what you have.
Does it have a reference number?
It's in section 2.5. There's a paragraph that begins, water that has been contracted for. In any event, there's a statement here that the average order amount in a 41-year simulation period is only 73 million cubic meters, right? That's what I'm referring to.
Yep.
So I'm just noting that because it seems like that would be an important number for another debate we're having here about environmental flows. If this seems to be saying that on average, whatever the amount contracted is, and I know farmers pay for the full amount, use or not, but if only 73 million is being used on average, it would seem to leave a lot of room for environmental flows or other uses of water. Is that? Well, I'm just noting for colleagues here. Well,
Sorry, Councillor, sorry, Chair. The fact of the matter is, assuming 100% uptake, those parties who have contracted that water, they've contracted, the scheme will be in breach of its contracts and at risk if it releases water for other purposes, including spot actually, on the basis that it then can't supply later. That's a dynamic situation. Everybody around this table knows that month to month, the forecast around whether we've got a dry period, a wet period, but more inflow of dam or whatever, is highly volatile. So you're stepping into dangerous territory if you think that you can take 30% of the water out of this actually contracted to other parties and put that down the river on the scheme part on the basis that it might actually need that water in the next month supply of irrigation.
Well, I didn't suggest taking
That's
all
what
this
you got.
water, but there's a huge gap between 73 and 90-something, and
It's
we've been
cool.
talking about
It's
four
cool.
of
I'd rather
that.
buy,
We've been talking about 4 of that. You would think that's a big enough gap
We're not
to
in
provide
debate, councillor
for,
Bell, because if you go to your third question, I'll move on to other questions.
back to the last appendix here, which is the sensitivity analysis, and this reinforces what Councillor Barker was raising. Would it not be possible for you, given that you have a model sitting there available to plug in anything, to give us a different view of a more conservative water uptake scenario?
Well, I could
If
certainly,
this council felt like it was important to know what a slower, perhaps to some of us more realistic uptake might actually mean in terms of these benefits.
if I was asked, if somebody gave me a different set of uptake rates and said, model these for me, it'd be a few hours work to model them for you and give you another number here with a different, different net present values as in this table. That's easy to do, just tell me the numbers.
Councillor Dick.
Yes, Madam Chair, and I think this is directed towards Andrew. In regard to the predictions for land use, which naturally there's a level of uncertainty, but when HPREP reports on contracted uptake after the 18th of April, will it at the same time be able to give an indication of prospective land uses for that contracted water?
Yes, it will be able to do that.
So we'll wait and see, and all will be revealed.
And I'd also note, just record this little stat, that of those parties contracting for water, if they irrigate 90% of their land, and if they irrigate at a rate which is at a slightly different risk allocation rate than they're doing currently, they'll take well in excess of 2/3 of the total water. Good one.
Thank you, councillor Scott.
Thank you. I want to come back to your table 7 and the land use. I gather that this is a fairly indicative land use and it doesn't cover such things as seed production, which is something that's very likely in the future. So there are probably other land uses there in the future that we haven't considered. Therefore, can you give me some idea of just taking one example of seed, which indicative land use would that more comfortably sit in terms of farm income and employment?
This is one where I've got pastoral and arable farming probably combined in this, but here's a reference. There are 5 different land, the actual farm budgets we've got, which I think are probably reported in the original full report and that we in the McFarlane report. It has one for arable farming and it has one for finishing farming. I guess it falls into the arable farming, but it's probably a poor example.
Seed production, such as carrot seeds and vegetable seed
Oh,
production.
really intensive stuff like that?
Yes, really intensive stuff like that.
Well, that's probably best, probably comes more like orchards. As I said, orchards are a placeholder for a whole bunch
Actually,
of.
this is a placeholder. We're not talking about whether Farmer Jones is putting in so many trees. It is an indicative land use that could cover a variety of alternative,
Yes.
same type of economic return employment opportunities.
Yes, it could, and those, you always draw a line of, we could do, 50 different farm budgets, and so you would try and bring it down to a manageable level, and there are these intensive uses, as I said, in the Hiranui case, we used black currants, because that was what people were doing, and we had some good farm budgets for that. So I guess it's just an intensive land use, which the horticulture covers.
Thank you. All right, I've got 3 questions. Councillor Brown's.
Firstly, I have a question, but I want to thank
well, thanks for interrupting me, I'm quite clear it hasn't changed. The overall project, you brought those numbers to us. We got those numbers from you, not from our own team. My question is, does it concern you, I know you talked about not your role and it's not your expertise, but does it worry you as a professional economist that you have, in this room alone, 2 industry experts? You have in the peppermint industry, you've been in the economist for 40 years, I've been a fruit grower for 40 years. And we know this industry. Now, Andrew says that he has some grower who is supporting these numbers in pit fruit. He hasn't told us their name. We'd be really interested to know their name because we can have a chat to clarify that. But in this room right now is a bloke down the back who's been in grape growing all his life, who was president of the local association on the national scheme, and it would be interesting to get his view, because I got it this morning, that growing grapes in this region is a very difficult thing to do. Big corporations have tried, and they have failed and left. There is only one really successful grower down there growing grapes now. Lots of people looked at it, including us, and failed. My question to you is, you've got all these other industry experts, you've got ones that expert are being used, all these other ones who are saying, these numbers don't work, this doesn't work. My wife was the ag manager for Heinz Waddy. She tried her best over 15 years to get crops grown down there. Heinz have said they will not be going there. It is not the best place for them to go. Now, other things may happen, of course. Actually, I think, I made a joke about hens probably will grow very well down there. But you're taking information from people, but you've got a whole other bunch of people saying, that's not credible. Does that worry you?
It does concern me that there are a whole bunch of people who think that the numbers are not credible, and that was the reason why at those 2 public meetings I said, give me some alternative budgets so I can understand where the differences are. In terms of a cost-benefit analysis, a pure cost-benefit analysis instead of the economic impacts to jobs and stuff. For the cost-benefit analysis, I'm really interested in what do you think the bottom line is under an irrigated farming scenario in this area. Now, somebody says to me, you've got $3,000 a hectare, you're dreaming it'll be $500 a hectare. And I would say, so this is still over and above. That's after you paid for water, after you paid for your cost of capital and what have you. So it concerns me that the numbers might be too big, yes. But until somebody, I mean, I know Andy McFarlane, I know the guys at Ag First. I respect their abilities, and they've given me some farm budgets which they say, we think these are realistic. Now, if somebody has given me some other farm budgets and says, could you model these? Yeah, sure, we can do that. I'm not quite sure where it will take. It will show us the sensitivity, I suppose, to different budgets. And we'd end up with a significantly, if you're correct, we'd end up with significantly lower economic impacts if there's only going to be sheep and beef farming in the area and dairy. We'd end up with significantly lower net present values. But provided people take up the water, we'd still have positive net present values. So you asked me whether I was worried. I'm a bit concerned that there's so much volatility. There's so many people who think that this is wrong, but I take some comfort from the fact that this project will only proceed if there are enough farmers who are the people who really know what's going on their land with their situation. If there are enough farmers who take up the land and say, from my perspective, this is worthwhile. And that's the really big, yeah, that's the really acid test. If you can't get people to take up the water, then you'd say, well, we're going up the wrong tree. The other thing that gives me, I guess, some confidence, and I'm not, it really, to be honest, it's coming more from listening to guys like Andy McFarlane, Stuart Ford, another agriculture economist I work with, who's talked to me about the changes in land use that people weren't really thinking of when you get irrigation available. You get, and we're talking about a 70-year project, and there's obviously, it's not very often that you close down an irrigation scheme because you've already met the capital cost, so that's not much evidence. But you do get a range of land uses after 30, 40, 50 years that people never thought of at the time we first got into the project, and which wouldn't be feasible without one of these projects going ahead. I'm much more concerned at a purely personal level rather than economics level. I'm much more concerned about environmental issues, for example, and about the social issues than I am about the financial issues, because I think that the project won't go ahead unless people have got a reasonable degree of certainty about the financial issues. When I look at the other irrigation projects, after 5 years of the project, they sold their land to somebody, because, quite often it's because they just don't want to get into a new land use. You know, who wants to milk cows and do it at 5 o'clock in the morning, etc., etc. And they sell their land to somebody who does want to get into a new land use. So your question was, am I worried? I'd like it if people always read realistic budgets, yes. I'm happy to model different budgets because it's not very hard to do and look at the effects on economic impacts. The same as it's not hard to model some slower uptake rates. But all the two things that they have to be consistent with the project going ahead. There's not much point in asking me to model an uptake rate that starts at 30% when the project won't go ahead unless you've got whatever percentage it is commitment. So that has to be a bottom line. There's not much point in asking me to model what the benefits will be if farming's operating at a loss with a realistic water price, because it won't happen. So within those provisos, I'm perfectly happy to model different stuff. It's straightforward.
Andrew, did you wish to add something to that?
Oh, I just reinforce and repeat that the uptake curves that Jeff used in this analysis were generated through a forecasting model presented to the council in September of 2015 with a set of assumptions. You'll receive that. It's not dreamed up by a few biases around a particular land use. It is a forecasting model. It's not perfect. And reality will be reality, but I'd absolutely reinforce, and I should also make the point that we, HBRIC, actually, with Jeff, said when we got these numbers, said 4,000 hectares is clear impact. We want some sensitivity run around both the uptake curve and we want some sensitivities run around the volume of land, actually, on horticulture. So we asked for that very reason. And we went back and asked people in the industry for their view as to whether these look realistic or not. So but I'm going to finish.
When were you going to tell us these price increases? When were you going to do
You
that?
said in a workshop, Rex.
Not these, not this.
No, hang on. The land use impacts, price increases are what they are. They're nothing to do with HBRIC. They're simply a reflection of a set of assumptions around land uses. As for CapEx issues, you know, and you've sat in workshops where these issues have been discussed, right? So don't raise the thought that, oh, you just all of a sudden there's been a cost increase that you're completely unaware of. You knew, and I've said on a number of occasions, that we are dealing with an expanded land area, for example. So there's nothing new in that.
Okay. Councillor Wilson.
I'm just interested, everyone talks about increased costs, but the question I have, it's an investment, surely. How do you view when the values have changed, but everyone's talking about costs? It's actually inward investment into our region, surely, because there is a return on it. Is that a fair assumption?
Well, I think it's a fair assumption. People aren't going to invest unless they think there's a return. I also get, I read that Radio New Zealand thing, I thought, you're missing the point, guys. You're focusing entirely on, and you're calling an increase in investment an increase in cost. Now, in the case of a dam, if the cost of the dam, and you're getting the same thing, let's say, if it goes up by $50 million, that's an increase in cost of $50 million. You're not getting anything extra out of it. But when you have an increase in on-farm investment of $200 million, that's not an increase in cost in any sensible measure of return cost. It's an increase in investment. More money is going to be spent than was originally expected. But it's not as though you're getting nothing back for the extra money. You're investing in these sorts of land uses. And as you point out, well, if we don't get that land use, well, I suppose you'll all be happy because then we won't get the extra cost. It just doesn't seem to be a useful way to use the word cost. They should have used the phrase, there'll be an increase in costs of $50 million, whatever the numbers were, and there'll be an increase in capital investment in the region of $300 million because there are different land uses now predicted, right or wrong. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Jeff. This is a really interesting and useful discussion. And I think to just preface my question by saying that we've all seen these and heard these projections before. I think back to Think Big and 440,000 jobs, where none of them was ever near that many that arrived. Have always been oversold and underperformed. So there's a bit of cynicism about this. But I just want to get, and I think that's part of what I'm doing this with as well. You make these things as big or small as you like by what your inputs are. But I think the real test of this, you put your finger on it before, is this the key element. Whatever we speculate here on this paper is almost immaterial. The truth of it is that it'd be individual decisions by individual entities and farmers deciding to buy the water to do what they will do with it. And at the end, what they do with it will generate more or less revenue than we think the projections here. We are almost irrelevant speculators on this. The truth of it is that people will either buy in or not. And what they do with the water, it will be their decision.
Yep.
We are just speculators on the side. That's the key issue here. And this paperwork that we've got here, I would say in a way, is just to sort of help influence the debate, plus or minus, better or worse. That's what it is. The truth is, individual decisions, checkbooks will decide.
Can I also make,
But that's the question, that's the issue.
Madam Chair, I just want to point out as well that this is not HBRIC's invention. HBRIC was asked by, in fact, actually Councillor Belford and then the council, if they could assist with an update of the McFarlane report and the Butcher report, which is precisely what's been delivered. There's no other agenda in it than that.
Just one last thing, Councillor Chair. No, it's just, I forgot to mention at the beginning of the meeting, I'm doctor's appointment at 12 o'clock. So I need to go, so excuse me for that.
Councillor Belford, last question for you. Moving towards recommendation.
Well, your comments that it sort of doesn't matter as long as individual farmers buy in. Well, the public purpose of this document is to help justify a ratepayer investment, since this is not a farmer-financed project. This is a ratepayer and ultimately taxpayer probably financed project. It is important whether these things like job estimates hold water or not, because the public purpose of this document is to go out and say, our consultant says there are now going to be 3,500, 3,600 jobs generated by this program, and that is a large part of the justification why someone other than the farmers whose individual farm profitability might go up or down, or presumably up, on the basis of this is the determining factor. It's not the determining factor. If it were, farmers would finance this, not other people. That's what we're asking to have happen here. And so this number has gone up, this jobs number, as a for instance, has gone up over 1,000 since you presented to the Board of Inquiry. And you're telling us that it is totally driven, basically, by orcharding and vineyards, which a number of people here with depth are saying is nonsense. And so it is important to have this airing out. You probably shouldn't be the person sitting at the table here. It should be McFarlane. That's where the issue is at the end of the day, as to whether this benefits the broader community or not is an issue of, is there job creation? Are these incomes going to flow out? And so forth. If it's simply a matter of whether 150 or 200 farmers in Central Hawke's Bay are going to make more money, then let them finance it.
Well,
What's wrong with that analysis?
Well, there are a number of comments, not quite so many questions, but the last one was what's wrong with the analysis. The first you said that I said it's irrelevant. I said it's irrelevant to the cost-benefit analysis. It's not irrelevant, obviously, to the social impact analysis. The land uses have a huge impact on the number of jobs created. Yes, this is part of the public debate, and if there are a lot less jobs created, people say, well, perhaps this isn't worthwhile.
Thank you.
What was your last bit? What's wrong with the analysis? There's nothing wrong with the analysis. Your analysis. I mean, if you don't get these land uses, you won't get these jobs. And if you want to use some different numbers, we could use any number of different numbers you like and figure out the economic impacts of that. There are people who think that these are unrealistic land uses, and there are other people who thought they were realistic. It's a problem in a sense because, as you point out, the people making those judgments on land use have no skin in that particular game. If they're wrong about the land use, it won't cost them a whole lot of money. But you asked why farmers won't do it themselves, and the answers are, to me, pretty obvious. And in fact, I wrote a paper for Treasury on it in about 2002, which is that there are aspects of risk which farmers tend to be risk averse, and when you get a single farmer, he won't take the risks that are involved, so you end up with a grouping of the community which says these risks are worth taking, and when you aggregate risk and diversify it, the risk is less. The other problem is that there's a huge, an economist would call it a transactions cost. If you try and bring 3,000 farmers together and say, look, all put your money in, we're going to do this thing, and Central Plains has finally done it in stages, but it ended up having a huge amount of support from local councils. In the case of Opua, it was, I think it was Alan Hubbard. Alan Hubbard, who...
70% local government money first.
Okay. These things tend to be driven by people who say we can afford to take some risks as a community, provided we think we're going to get a reasonable reward for the risks that we're taking, and provided we think that, on balance, the project will be for the benefit of the community. You get reasonably... The jobs that occur will be quite diversified. The benefits that finally occur, the initial benefits go, financial benefits, primarily to the farmers and to the owners of the water project. In the long term, in the particular structure you've got here, after 70 years, the community gets to own the water project with whatever benefits it then has and reaps those benefits over the years. I just don't see farmers as having the ability to manage that kind of a scale of investment.
But they are going to have to somehow come up with $550 million, are they?
Yeah, but it's easy as a farmer.
That is a cost to them, right?
Yes, but of course it's a cost, but as a farmer, if I'm having to pay $10,000 a hectare up front versus $700 a year as an annual water charge, one I feel is much more affordable, it's less risky, although I am committed for 35 years. In cash flow terms, it's much easier. So I think there are good reasons why a group of farmers isn't likely to do it individually, and I don't think that their failure to do it indicates that it's not a good project.
I have another question, and I'm going to ask again, please can you check your cell phones are turned off in the audience? Councillor Scott.
Yes. Thank you. I just want to come back and partly my question was raised by Councillor Wilson, and partly you have answered it, and that's around what the so-called $1 billion project cost is. The project cost is the project of the RWSS, in my understanding, is that correct?
Well, there are two aspects of the project. There's the RWSS project, and then there's a whole farming project which kind of goes hand in hand with it. But you can see them as two separate things.
Thank you, and I really want to know around that on-farm investment, because you have actually seen it increase considerably plus the profits. Can you actually drive more profit without driving more investment?
Oh, yes, but sometimes you change the way you do things, you get more profits. And in fact, the per hectare farm budgets show significant increases in horticulture, partly through productivity gains. So that doesn't necessarily require a whole lot of investment. Sometimes it does. You've got to plant new sorts of trees. Sometimes it's a lot because you move into a whole new technology. Generally speaking, we've got a whole lot more profit because we've got a whole lot more investment, which I really think is the thrust of your question, isn't it? You couldn't get the increase in profits without the increase in investment.
And that's an increase in employment too?
Yes.
So that's a good news story?
Yeah, well, if it happens, yes.
Councillor Bevan.
Thanks, Chair. This is really a question for Andrew. We've, up until now, up until yesterday, I thought that the cost of the dam million the money we've already spent. This paper appears to indicate that the price now is 330 million plus the money we've already spent. Can you confirm that's
I'm
right?
going to
Sorry,
ask.
I just turned it on.
Thank you.
One of the reasons is that you're possibly,
Yeah.
there's a dam cost and associated infrastructure costs, and then included in the figure I've got there is mitigation costs over 35 years. And there are, I understand that there are some commercial sensitivity issues, which I shouldn't be talking about exactly how much is in which group.
Absolutely.
But let's just say that those mitigation costs were quite a big number.
So you mentioned the mitigation costs before. Can you just describe what they are?
Oh, no, I can't remember.
Oh, look, I can.
You probably
I
can.
can give you a generic description. The other point I'd make is that that's an aggregate number. It is commercial. The underlying numbers are commercially sensitive, and for obvious reasons, I won't go any further than that. I'm happy to talk to you offline about some of those numbers and whether they're needed or not needed in the future, actually. So what we're essentially giving you is a number where we raise a certain amount of capital in an aggregate sense. But I'm not going to go any further than that, other than I'm happy to deal with mitigation. Mitigation is the effectively, so in placing a dam inside a river system and affecting the surrounds, plus releasing water down the river, there's not what we call an offsets and mitigation package over a 35-year period. And that involves various ecological biodiversity works, you name it, planting works, both around the reservoir, down the river system, etc., etc., etc. That's what Jeff's referring to as the offset and mitigation package. And the point being that on this comparison table, the original study was done at feasibility phase, and that feasibility phase is, hell, that's 4 years ago. So a lot's changed since then through the development phase. That's what the mitigation work is. And it's pretty substantial. And what I would say is it's probably, in terms of this type of project in New Zealand, it's the largest biodiversity offsets and mitigation package, in my knowledge, that's been done for a New Zealand project.
I have somebody who's moved the recommendation on page 33. Did we receive a note to report? Is anyone prepared to second it? Thank you, Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks very much for the report today. It's comprehensive, it's professional, but it's still essentially a crystal ball gazing exercise, and I think Councillor Barker summed the matter up pretty realistically in saying that, I can't remember his exact words, but we're spectators and speculators on this. And the basic fact is that in a few weeks' time, I expect, all will be revealed. We will know whether there is enough contracted uptake to justify the project proceeding, and we will have a fair idea of what the land uses are likely to be. And then it would be possible, if the council wanted it to happen, for this exercise to be reworked on the basis of a relatively high level of certainty. That's correct, isn't it?
Well, you'd know more about the uptake rate perhaps, and you might know more about the land use, but it would still only be the land use on 45 or 50% of the total area.
So my view is that it's appropriate to receive this report and progress on.
Thank you, Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the report and your very clear and honest answers to it. Obviously, there are some assumptions here, but what is interested me is how much you've grounded those assumptions. Yep, we're referring to particular land uses and questioning this, but you've made it quite clear it's, in your terms, a placeholder or an indicative land use, and there are other alternative uses equally intensive, and that's what we want to know. Is this a scenario that's going to give these returns? You've grounded your budgets in actual budgets rather than hearsay, and while we've heard that these have been questioned, unless the alternative budgets are equally grounded, in fact, then I think they are totally and utterly irrelevant. So the important thing is, yep, you've shown us quite clearly where there are assumptions, but also you've given us a degree of confidence in what it has been grounded in. And overall, Madam Chair, I think that it is a very good news story that the increased investment in the area is very positive, and that the outcome of that increased investment is increased profit, which has a flow-on effect right throughout the community, and actually from the feasibility stage has made this look even more attractive. So it's a very positive potential for Hawke's Bay.
Councillor Belton.
Jeff, I admire your ability to build such a glorious castle on such a weak foundation. I think these underlying assumptions are indefensible, and therefore I'm going to vote against accepting the report, not on the basis of what you've done in this report, but on the basis that if by accepting this report, we're effectively blessing those underlying assumptions, because it's only if you bless those underlying assumptions that any of the rest of this can be presented fairly to the public. And I don't think it's fair to present these kinds of projections of jobs and income and so forth to the public, given that the underlying assumptions are what they are. So because we can't defend the orcharding and viticulture assumptions, we then turn to, oh, what else might be equally intensive? Let's make it seeds. Oh, well, if it's not seeds, how about fairy dust? That's where we're going with this. It's my right to speak, Mr. Chairman.
Keep it on the topic.
It is on the topic. I'm explaining my vote. It's absolutely on the topic. So I think, and again, I'm not questioning how you've applied your methodology to this, but I think the foundation sucks. And I think for us as a council to go forward with this as a realistic projection of the economic benefits and social benefits of this project for the people of Hawke's Bay would be misleading, to be generous. I'm voting against it.
Further speakers? No. Councillor Graham.
Thank you. Once again, I want to thank you for the report. I subscribe to the view that Councillor Belford has forwarded. It's nothing against you. It's nothing against your report, nothing against the job you've done. But everything that Councillor Belford said is dead right. If we support this, we are effectively supporting the assumptions that have gone to make the numbers. And in my view, many of the assumptions here are pure fantasy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your report. This is fascinating listening to some of my colleagues here. When you consider that probably 10 years ago, 5,000 trays of apples per hectare on the plains would have been a pipe dream. In fact, you would have been laughed out of any pub. But that's happening today, and that's happening because of technology, including genetic technology. The opportunity south of here is actually a greenfields opportunity. And who knows what they might be doing down there. I mean, we've seen parts of the states go from dairying to blueberries as an example, because it's based on return on investment, not return on cost, as we've heard some confused mumblings about over the last week or two on particularly Radio New Zealand, but return on investment. And I've got great confidence in the pit fruit industry to find a way to make it work. If they can't make it work, their ambitions for growth are going to be staggered and, dare I say it, probably not realised. But I have great faith in the technology behind the pit fruit industry in Hawke's Bay that they will make it work. The land is cheaper, the water is more reliable. Let's everyone take a deep breath and look toward the future with some positive outcome.
Thank you, Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. Jeff, I've actually quite enjoyed the discussion, and I thank you for coming along and being pretty frank and open and honest about the numbers in your report, and also going to vote against receiving the report, but it's got absolutely nothing to do with you, as I'm sure you'll understand. This is all about reasonable reward for the community from the investment that the regional council will make. And if we adopted this report, we would be giving some validity to numbers that, frankly, if you believe the numbers in this report, you'd also believe in the peak periods. They're just not credible in my view. I'm from the food industry. I know all the major players in the food industry. I've asked extensively amongst that industry and amongst the grape industry. I cannot find any present intention of anybody putting trees or grapevines down there in the next 10 years. And the next 10 years are the critical ones, in my view, for this project. I've spoken to AgFirst about this because they're the ones who have supplied some of the modelling information on profitability. And I can tell you that AgFirst were not asked to express a view on whether people are going to plant in Checker Hawke's Bay or not. They were merely given some numbers on number of hectares and asked to comment on the profitability, not on the viability. And the viability, the big problem with viability with Central Hawke's Bay, quite simply, is the risk of frost. Yep. And while there continues to be a whole lot of land available here on the Heritalan Plains for these purposes, nobody is going to be planting down there, including the entity that's bought the 1 million cubic metres plus that you mentioned, Andrew. They're not going to be increasing plantings or doing anything down there either. It's a defensive move. I know about that. So, as I say, if we adopt this report, we're giving the employment numbers, for instance, some validity, which I don't believe it deserves.
Councillor Pipe.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for the report. It's been a very interesting discussion listening around the table and also listening to commentary earlier on Radio New Zealand. It's a typical case, I guess, of glass half empty and glass half full. It depends on which way you look at it, and I think some of the arguments that have been raised around here are pure speculation. I think the nub of this is whether or not the farmers are going to sign up, and that's that condition precedent that has to be met. I think this report in no way is going to influence any of those farmers down there. There's no way that it is going to. They're going to make their decision on whether they sign up for water on another set of criteria with regards to their farm and regards to how they're going to use their land down there and what sort of land. We can speculate around this table until the cows come home. It's up to them down there to sign up. This is very valuable information. It gives us, and I think it's been mentioned, a bit of a crystal ball gaze into the future that may be there. It may be the crops that are going to be grown in that particular area. It may not. We don't know. We don't know, for instance, the sort of crops that are being grown on certain areas of land here in Hawke's Bay. Coming from Hastings, I know what the gimlet gravels looked like and what it was used for 40 years ago. That's changed completely, and I think we may see that sort of thing happening down in the Ruatanapa area as well. So, well done. Thank you for the report.
Sorry, Jeff, if I'd just like to echo the words of everyone else in regards to your report. I will say I woke up this morning quite concerned that the price of the dam has suddenly jumped out to $1 billion. I thought, geez, concrete and steel must have shot up overnight while I was asleep.
Twice the size.
Yeah, or something along those lines. I'm going to agree with all the comments that Councillor Pipe has said, but in saying that, I'm still going to vote against it. I'm going to vote against it for these reasons, because they are assumptions that you have made, and for me, they have not been supported well enough by the national. I would have preferred to have you had come to us with the support of the national bodies, Pip Fruit Association, Viticulture Association, who said, actually, your assumptions hold some weight, but it's not here. The other reason why I'm voting against it is because I know that our local newspaper or the media will actually cover what's in this report, and they will say that all these jobs are going to be created based on your report. And it's really very hard for anyone in this room to put their hand on their heart and say, that is correct, because we actually don't know. The decision as to whether the dam will go ahead, it will be made by you councillors, and I take my hat off to you for having to make that decision. It's not going to be easy, but you are going to have to make it. More importantly, it will be the farmers, the ones who will take the uptake at the end of the day, that will decide whether this project is a viable project or not. And you're really not going to know that to the 18th. And I do understand from the other part, and some of those key milestones that were required by councillors, was the cornerstone investment. So I think those are the things that are going to influence your fellows' decisions going forward at the end of the day. In 100 years' time, who knows what the land use is going to be? We could be sitting in drought, and we all wish we had brought down the Central Hawke's Bay because the water's there. Who knows? Or we could have climate warming, and we're all sitting underneath water and wishing we were living in the desert. So all those things, are beyond us. But it's really going to come down to the farmers and their choice to pick it up. But as I said, I appreciate your report. I appreciate what Councillor Piper said. Absolutely agree with it. But I actually can't vote for what the information being released as being the position of a committee that I sit on anyway. Kia ora.
Thank you. Dr. Martin.
Kia ora. I also support what Councillor Pike said. In the end, the farmers will make their decision, and I've always held that position. I'm in no position to tell farmers what to do with their investment. And they've survived down there for over 100 years farming that land, and so they will make a decision based on what's best for them as individual business owners. And nothing said around this table is going to change that. And I have incredible faith in that as a pragmatic rather than philosophical decision about this. However, as a resident of Central Hawke's Bay, that the other effects are the ones that affect me, and that's the social and socio-economic ones rather than on-farm ones. And listened carefully to the debate today, read your report and read other reports, and I'm still of the opinion that for us living in Central Hawke's Bay, this is a positive event to stimulate our local economy and to make it a place worth living, and also attract people back to our district. So I can vote in favour of it.
Thank you. I will take the opportunity to speak as well. I'd like to thank you for coming along today. Jeff, you've walked into a rather volatile room full of robust debate, and it's nice to see you here. Whether the figures that are presented today are as they are, or whether you took the earlier figures, I still think that they're good news stories for economic development within our region, and I'm delighted to see that there are predictions for an increased footprint, hence increased opportunities for employment and increased growth throughout our region. We have a couple of things that I think are defining within the debate. One is the confusion between cost of the construction of the project and capital investment on farm, and I think it's really important that we don't run away with billion-dollar figures, and we do actually focus on what is the figure we're discussing here, which is about the $294 million figure. I think to do otherwise is irresponsible. Another area that's coming up in debate is a definition of horticulture, and as a long-standing director of Horticulture New Zealand, I know that it was really interesting across the primary sector to try and define horticulture. If you'd said to people, what is it? Often they'd be confused and say kiwi fruit or whatever. So we're coming down to words, and orcharding's taking a bit of a limelight here, but whether that's pick fruit or quite likely a lot wider in context than what we're just focusing on, I think is yet to be determined. I'm well aware of interest outside of New Zealand, as in in orcharding investment opportunities in Central Hawke's Bay, and it's not just pip fruit. There are other opportunities that come under that orcharding definition that do qualify in Central Hawke's Bay. I'm also well aware of other, in the local down in Central Hawke's Bay, I'm aware of investment opportunities, people looking to plant and take over current vineyards. There's more than one vineyard down there, Rex, and this makes jolly good wine too. We have had a robust debate today, and I'd like to sincerely thank you for your time and coming and joining us. And as has been said, the real decision is down to the farming community now, the water users, and I look forward to hearing the report on that in the next couple of weeks. Thank you. Do you wish to sum up?
Just very briefly, Madam Chair, I'd just like to remind councillors that the resolution states that the committee receives and notes the update report. It does not specify that the council or the committee adopts the report. So there is space there for differing opinions to prevail. However, I think in the discussion so far, one thing has concerned me, and it's concerned me in debate around this table quite frequently, and that is that councillors declare the position that they are going to take in voting before the debate has concluded and before their colleagues have had the chance to offer their opinion. Now, the risk in that is it's an indication of predetermination and a closed mind, and I think we've all got to be very careful about that. Coming back to the themes, well, it was repeated by Councillors Pipe, Mr Paku and Dr Marker that the acid test will be contracted uptake, and we will know, we'll be pretty well informed about that in the relatively near future. I don't think there's much more can be said, but I would encourage councillors to, albeit they may have specified a different direction in voting in the discussion, I would encourage them to support the recommendation, which is to receive and note the report, which I believe has been a very good and useful report.
Thanks, Councillor Luke. I put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. And against?
No.
I'll call for a show of hands division, please. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And against? Okay, the motion's carried. Thank you. Thanks.